I'll never forget it. He said, I'd be happy to speak to you about it, Debbie. And so we went to a coffee shop, and he said, but in the middle of this, I may have to take a phone call. And I said, sure, not a problem. So we're talking about what I was doing, and the phone rings, sure enough, and he takes the call, and he was talking to live.com. And he said, live.com, yes. And we're thinking about, this is going to be a search engine, and maybe we need to change the name to Bing.
In that little snippet you just heard, Debbie recounted her experience when she was chatting with a ex-colleague who was now mentoring her on her business, who actually was consulting Microsoft on the name of Microsoft's search engine, Bing. Pretty high places she rubbed shoulders with. And you're just going to have to listen to the whole story, because Debbie started right at the beginning when SEO wasn't even a word that people could spell. So go listen to her story. Enjoy.
Staying Alive UK. Share your story.
Welcome to the Share Your Story podcast, Debbie. How are you today?
Good morning, Michael. I'm wonderful. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much for joining on the podcast all the way from the USA. And I'm really super excited to hear your story today, because as we just said, just before we got on live, it is so unusual for me to be speaking to a lady, a woman who's so involved in the whole internet, marketing, digital strategy, and we'll get into all of that. But before we do, every single person that comes on this podcast gets asked the same question as the listeners are kind of, or the first question anyways, is always the same question. And that is, would you please share a little bit about your personal life? So where were you born? A bit about your education, where you now live, maybe a bit about your family if you want to. You don't have to. Hobbies and interests, just so people get a sense of who Debbie is behind the business. So the person behind the business. So over to you, Debbie.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for giving me this opportunity to share. I live in Connecticut. I'm in a small town in Chester, and I'm working for myself and have been consulting, digital marketing consulting, since 2008. And it's certainly been quite the journey. And I've had the opportunity, I grew up here in Connecticut. It's actually a beautiful town. As I was saying to you earlier, I'm very close to New York City, about 2 hours, and just a couple hours from Boston. So Connecticut really is an ideal place to be. And I've had the opportunity to travel quite a bit, and I've visited most of the U.S. and spent a lot of time on the West Coast as well, and also abroad. And every time I go away and separate myself from Connecticut, I keep finding myself coming back here. So I guess home is where your heart is, and I guess my heart truly is Connecticut. So it's been terrific to be able to have that privilege to travel, because not so many people do.
No.
And and so I've really enjoyed having that opportunity. And when you go to different cultures and you visit different places that haven't different exposures, and I've gained a lot of knowledge by understanding people a little bit more by stepping out of my comfort zone. So that's one of the things I enjoy a lot, is traveling when I have the opportunity to do so, and then always coming home. So that's where I'm at.
So where were you educated, Debbie?
Actually, my education was here in Connecticut, and I started out with a degree in marketing, and from there, I got my first job. which was quite interesting.
Okay, tell us.
Okay, all right. So my very first job was, and it really does suit my personality, is that I went to go work in Connecticut, which no longer exists, but it was a newspaper called The Advocate. And The Advocate is a very left-wing liberal paper. It was a part of the ANN Group, which was the alternative news network. Very a part of like the Village Voice. These are publications here in Connecticut. Yes. I mean, in the U.S. And so my first job out of college was going to work as a rep in advertising for an alternative paper. And that was, I can really say that was kind of the grit of learning the ins and outs of marketing for me. It was, I spent 4.5 years there, and we were a paper that had quite a bit of advertising, and my focus was always with the arts. I wanted to, so the newspaper that I worked for originally had a lot of bars and restaurants, and here we were talking about art, but we weren't representing the arts in advertising. So that's where I shot out to. So I went to the museums, and I went to the schools, and I went to universities, and I got them involved in the paper, which was really unique. It was something that was very different than what other people were focusing on. So it took me a little time to ramp up and convince universities and museums to advertise in our newspaper. But when they did, they realized, geez, they were reaching their audience, and it ended up being very successful. So that was my very first job. It was newspaper advertising girl.
And did you have to physically go and see those people? Or did you do it over the phone? How did you?
I physically went out and knocked on doors, and I remember one of my greatest feats. Well, this is kind of a funny story where we have a casino that opened up in here in Connecticut, and it was the first time ever. And so every rep was trying to get into this casino and trying to get their business. And I got the name of the marketing director. And instead of badgering them, what I did was I took my newspaper and I would find an article that was very relevant to their business. And I would make a big red box, and I'm like, you too could be advertising here. And I'd stick a sticky note, and I'd send them the paper every week. And I did that for a year. And there was, no response, nothing. And finally, they said, you know what, we'd like you to come in and speak to us. So I got to the casino, and it was a morning. So the casino was kind of quiet. And they had a facility that was for entertainment. And one of the things that I'm actually terrified of is roller coasters. They're just not my thing.
Right.
And so I get set up, and they put me in. It was actually Frank Sinatra had just played at the casino. Oh. So they brought me into his dressing room, and there's this big stoic couch. And I remember sitting in it, and I almost sunk into it, so I couldn't even see the person I was talking to. And I remember sitting up on my leg to try to get some exposure there. And we talked, and they said, oh, let's show you the casino. And so we went around, and he said, let's go see the virtual ride. So here I am in my business suit and terrified of these roller coasters. And I remember sitting in the seat, and I'm trying to keep my composure. Normally I'd be screaming my head off. And I remember just saying, close your eyes, Debbie, breathe, just breathe. As the seat went back, and it started going chick, 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 chick. And so as the ride went on, I'm kind of holding myself together by breathing deeply. And when it ended, I can remember I had this relief and sweat pouring off my head. And they said, you want to do it again? And I'm like, no, this was terrific. Thank you so much. This virtual ride was so real. I truly nearly threw up, but it was all great. Ended up not only selling them into my paper, which was the Hartford Advocate, but all 5 of our ANN papers. And
Wow.
so it was quite the feat. And I recall every rep was completely jealous, and it was lots of fun. And they were a client for the eternity of my career there at the Advocate. So that was my advertising days.
Oh, I love that story. And what you said in that, the message in that beautiful, funny story is never give up. You know, the fact that you send that paper with the posted note on it for a year.
A year.
Oh my God, that's just incredible. Most people would have given up after 4 weeks. I might have lasted 3 months at the most.
They were a perfect fit. And I think that it really shows to how I've approached advertising, is that I would see if my paper or my television advertising, which came next, and then the internet, if I always connect with a client and I have to know in my heart that my service is truly going to benefit them. Because if they're not successful in advertising with me, then I'm not successful. Yeah. And that's been my mode the whole time I've been in business. And so that was it. I knew that they would fit. I knew that their target audience was in my paper, and I didn't push it down them, but I gave them the opportunity to recognize it themselves. And that was a terrific. That was fun, and that was a long, long time ago.
So what happened after that? So when why did you leave the newspaper, and what happened next?
Newspaper advertising, and it went its duration for a good 4.5 years, and I enjoyed it. I met some fabulous people that I'm still connected with, and I loved it. And from there, I got the opportunity to go into cable television advertising. So here I went from print into television, and it was obviously a bigger medium. It was a bigger spend, and it was a really exciting time. I remember getting involved in it, and being able to go from print to going on screen was like revelation. It was like, wow, this is terrific, and setting up photos, shoots and all sorts of stuff. And I did that and absolutely loved it. But there was something that was really interesting during that time, Michael, which was, it was the late 90s. It was about probably 95. And I went to sit down with a potential client, and they said, "Hey, have you ever seen the internet?" And I'm like, "Nope, not sure what you're talking about." And this is about 95. And they said, well, let me show you. And so they went and they plugged their computer into a telephone line, and they dialed into AOL. They said, "Look at this." And at that juncture, I think my eyes popped out of my head. I was like, "What? Are you kidding me? Look at this medium. This medium can go all over the world. This is better than the yellow pages. This is better than any newspaper. This is better than any television that I've ever seen. What is this internet?" And it was at that point, I think a light switch went on, and it said, "Go that way." And that's when I started looking for companies that were doing web work. So this was probably 95, 96. And I started to work for a very small company here in Connecticut, and developing sites where we had never done it before.
No.
So we were hand coding everything, and I was working with very tiny companies and really getting them introduced to the web. And that was quite the adventure. I remember going into business appointments, and I was doing the same thing. "Do you have a fax line I can plug into?" And that's exactly what I was doing. And I remember sitting there one day waiting for a client to come in, and they saw my computer. I'd run around with my laptop, and they saw the windows, where Windows originally had the shooting windows going across the screen. And I remember the client saying, that's terrific. I want that. And I'm like, that's Microsoft? And we're really not able to do that at this juncture, but let's talk about a static site that's gonna work for you. So that was quite neat. And I stayed with this small company for about 2 years and really got the internet under my belt and saw that this was a medium that was like no other. And I remember getting involved. This is going to go way back for people who understand the net. I was on what was called the IRC at that time.
Right.
So, which was internet relay chat, and I was talking to people all over the world, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, this is amazing. I mean, I couldn't even call my aunt in Georgia without getting charged a huge fee.
Yes.
But here I was talking to people all over, and said, this is where I belong.
Yes.
So that was the very beginning.
Wow. So, I mean, literally, you've seen it grow from then to what it is today. And yeah, I've seen the same thing too. And it is just ridiculous now to where we've got to.
Indeed.
And okay, so that was getting involved with the internet, with the small company, getting smaller enterprises with the little websites up. What happened next?
Then from there, I went to go work with a company here in Connecticut, and they were really progressive. I remember sitting down in a meeting and they said, okay, we're going to be working on websites, but we're not going to work on anything that's not $25,000 and above. And I'm like, what? $25,000 for a website? Are you kidding me? This is 1997. And they said, nope. That's our target audience.
Whoa.
And so I said, okay, all right. So how do I go and reach this? And so at that juncture, I remember looking at the Fortune 500, looking at the Fortune 100. And it was funny because although they would sit and meet with me, they were reticent. They were reticent to put that type of investment into the web. And they were unsure of what their return would be, and they were conscientious about their money. And it was a very hard, long sell, and it took a while to convince people.
Yeah.
And at that point, my company did something very, very neat, where they merged with a company out of Portland, Oregon, which the original name was called MMG. And it was run by a gentleman called John Audette. And John and his team were getting involved completely in search engine optimization, which was a word I didn't even know about. And so it was like, okay. So we merged with MMG. And their team came up here to Connecticut, and it was an amazing value add. And it took me a while to understand what MMG had to offer. And their team coming on board was their intellectual property. It was understanding that not only do we have the web, not only are we creating websites, but now we're creating websites that can be found in search engines.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, wow. So watching this team and their progression and them coming in and showing us about affiliate marketing, about search engine optimization, about paid search in a time where there was not a conglomerate of, there was many search engines available at that time, Alta Vista and search engines that have really gone into the archives, into the Wayback Machine. So at that time, that's what we were working with. And then came Google. And it was like, what is Google? And so our company we ended up doing some really terrific work, and I had the privilege of working with a team that was really dynamic. And these were the pioneers of search.
Yeah.
And I didn't even really recognize it at that time. You know, when something's so new and it's in front of you. And now since my colleagues have gone on to be the pioneers of search. They're the authors of the books that have taught people how to do search engine optimization, and that's been really exciting. So we with our company, we took it to be a global company, and we were eventually sold to the WPP Group.
Yeah.
Which is a huge advertising conglomerate across the world, in fact.
Yes.
Holding some of the biggest, ad agencies, Ogilvy and Mather and J. Walter Thompson. And so it was like, wow. So in 2007, we sold the company, we divested, and we all went our separate directions, which left me without a job at that moment. Yes. And that was an interesting time for the web, because we had gone through what was called the .com boom, and then the burst.
Yes.
That was interesting. That was an interesting time, because people had all this wonderful faith, and then poof, they were like, wow, stepping back from it a little bit. And so here I was in Connecticut, and I thought, geez, what am I going to do next?
Yeah.
So that led me to starting to teach. I felt at that time where I had all this knowledge, and companies really hadn't at that time, and I'm talking about 2007 and 2008, companies were very, and I'm talking about SMBs, small, mid-sized businesses, really had no clue what this internet was at this juncture. They knew something about it. They knew it was kind of cool. It was expensive. Everybody was on it, but they weren't sure how they belonged. So I started teaching adult education classes. And at that time, we didn't even have the coined word of digital marketing consultant. So I made up my own title. So I was an internet strategist, and my goal, and I taught internet strategies for business.
Yeah.
And my classes were really to give companies an overview of how to approach the web and what the web could do for them. And it was really interesting. I remember I had been teaching for a couple of years, and what would happen is at the end of a class, I would have somebody walk up to me and they would say, "You understand this pretty well." And I said, "Yes, I do." And they said, "Can you come and help us?" And I'm like, as a practitioner, as a consultant, I really hadn't really thought about it. And then I said, okay. So at that time as well, and I might be rambling, so please forgive me.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Absolutely perfect. Keep going.
Terrific. Okay. So I remember they said, well, we're running paid search with Google, and we were spending about $1,000 a month, but we have no idea if it's working or not. And I said, okay. So at this juncture, I had already studied pay-per-click advertising as well.
Yeah.
So I was very fluent in organic search, and I was very fluent in paid search. And usually those are two different sides of the coin, but I looked at both of them, and I was deeply involved in both of them. So I went into this company, and they said, well, I said, well, who set up your Google AdWord account? And they said, well, Google did. And I'm like, oh, stars. Okay, let's take a look. And I was really like, without making any jokes here, it's like letting the fox in the hen house, because their spend was everywhere. They were marketing a very specific targeted audience, and they had a geographic set to the entire world. and they were only able to sell in the United States.
Oh.
So that was the first thing I noticed. It was like, okay, your geographic territory is it's going all the way to India. And they're like, what? We didn't want that. And I'm like, okay. So I helped them, and I ended up working with that company for about a good 4 years, and it continued to teach. And I remember from one class to another, I would be asked at the end, can you help us? Can you help us?
Yes.
So by 2008, I remember stepping back and saying, wait a second, I'm working for myself. And I didn't even realize it. It just I segued into it, Michael. I wasn't a conscious decision. It flowed that way. So that was really exciting.
Wow. I mean, the fact that you were doing consulting, I suppose you thought you were teaching, then you were consulting, and a year later you realized you were running your own business. I mean, that is the dream way of starting a business, right? Everybody would like to start their business that way.
It is fun. I remember at that juncture, it was, I had to step back, and I was a little bit unsure. And I went to one of my original colleagues back at our former company, who has written the book really called Search Engine Optimization. And that is the name of the book. And I remember sitting down and saying, Bill, is this right? Am I really going in the right direction? So we made an appointment, and we sat down together. I'll never forget it. He said, I'd be happy to speak to you about it, Debbie. And so we went to a coffee shop, and he said, but in the middle of this, I may have to take a phone call. And I said, sure, not a problem. So we're talking about what I was doing, and the phone rings, sure enough, and he takes the call, and he was talking to live.com. And he said, live.com, yes. And we're thinking about, this is going to be a search engine, and maybe we need to change the name to Bing. And here I was sitting there. I think my mouth was like gaping down, like, oh my stars, he's talking to Microsoft about changing the name from Live to Bing right in front of me.
God.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. It made me laugh. It was like, he got off the phone, and I think I had to recenter myself. Like, were you just consulting Microsoft on the new search engine? And he said, yes. I'm like, wow. So I remember we spent about 2 hours together, which was fantastic. And I remember at the end of it, I said, Bill, this is, one client has led to the next client and has led to the next client. And I'm not real sure if I'm on the right track. And he looked at me and he said, I can give you this piece of information. And I said, sure. He said, you asked all the right questions.
Right.
So.
Well, the right questions of the client or of him?
Of him. Right. I was asking the right questions of how to approach consulting, what I was going to be doing. I had definitely prepared for that one, Michael. Although he was a colleague, I also knew he was quite esteemed in the search arena. So I went pretty planned, and I had my whole list of questions. And I went, and I remember one of them, which was real funny, was about keywords. And I said, so the keyword tag's really important. And he looked at me and he said, it's not. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I mean, really? We put every page, we put our keyword tags in. He said, Debbie, the engines are not going to be recognizing that. And no one knew that. That was like some revelation. And I was like, so you really can't keyword stuff? And he said, no, you can't. That used to work in the olden days, and it's not working now. So I went back and started to really, I would say this is where I came into to self-teaching. And I said, okay, because I was working with these small companies, and I got asked to come consult for the University of Ohio Radio and Broadcast Division.
Yes.
And at that time, they wanted me to do an audit of all 7 of their websites. So I literally remember sitting in my office working around the clock, trying to decipher and understand their site and where it was, and their multiple sites, and in what condition they were at. Were they crawlable by the engines? And so I was really just digging as deep into it. Mm-hmm. And then I remember the day they flew me out to Ohio. And that day really was November 20th, 2008. And I remember that being, now that's my work anniversary. November 20th, 2008 was my work anniversary because I got flown out to Ohio. I remember walking into a meeting, and I had all of my meeting notes in, and I had done an audit for their site.
Yeah.
And I had about maybe 4 copies of the audit to sit down with. And I walk into this boardroom, and there's about 15 people across the table, and 3 people on teleprompters. And I realized I only had 4 copies of what and then no computer with me. Yeah. And I sat around the table, and I thoroughly understood their site. And I realized the president of the university was at the table. The search firm that had done all of their work was sitting at the table. And I kind of got splashed into something that I wasn't quite prepared for. I didn't realize I'd be speaking to such a big group. And I was able to explain where there was hiccups going on that was inhibiting their site. And I remember their search team of 4 people staring at me. Saying, she found the problem. and it ended up being a terrific opportunity. And I was able, they didn't fire their search firm, which I thought was pretty terrific. They actually asked me to work with them.
Yeah.
And so I came back to Connecticut, and I consulted with the team that was working for them, and got them kind of on track, and got them set up, and went on to my next gig.
Wow, that's great. Oh, the thing is, when I speak to people about their journey into running their own business, they have all these stories about how they got started, and yours is such a smooth, transition, almost like you didn't even know you were running your own business.
Exactly.
and it just kind of happened. I mean, you've just attracted it, which is just absolutely amazing and fantastic. And it's so nice to hear how it all happened and how it all developed. And of course, you knew by then that you were in the right space as well.
I did.
Yeah,
I did. It was natural. The internet was, it was unbelievable, and it still is, and it's growing. And I know one thing, Michael, that I could say about getting involved in the internet and getting involved in advertising. I mentioned this a little bit earlier when we spoke offline, was that I wanted to work with companies that I knew that I could help them. And that had really been the focus of all of my work, from print days, from television advertising to the internet. I really, really focused on companies that I knew my services were going to help them. And I always would sit down, and after my first meeting and understanding what their needs were, and when I would come back with a proposal or an offer to do an audit, I really based my own success on theirs.
Yeah.
And I said, if you're not successful, then neither am I.
Of course, because they are your best testimonials, your best recommendations are the ones that are going to be successful by the work that you've done for them, or the advice that you've given them, or the consultancy you've given them.
Indeed. Indeed.
And I think that's a great lesson to tease out of our conversation. And for people that are listening and wanting to start their own business, it's a beautiful value to have when you start your own business. Is one, recognizing and knowing that you recognize the kind of clients that need your help. And number two, making sure that they're going to be successful as a result of it. And very often, I believe, and I experience this, the business is very transactional of, we want a piece of work doing, you produce it, we pay you, that's it, Right. And I think it's up to us as business owners to make it a bigger piece, make it a bigger conversation, a bigger relationship with outcomes and results for them at the end of the day. Oh yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's just vital, so important.
Oh, thank you for allowing me to. Yes, you must be able to add value. And you have to see that your piece of the puzzle is going to fit with their piece and make it greater and bigger. And if you're able to do that, then you're on the right track.
So the other question I have for you, Debbie, because this is why I was so interested in speaking to you, because when I read your profile on LinkedIn, to see a woman who's involved in these very masculine areas of the internet, search engine optimization, search engine strategies, pay-per-click, or, strategic internet, digital marketing. And forgive me for saying it, and maybe I'm being, judgmental in my outlook, but I genuinely don't see many ladies doing this type of work. And hearing your story and how you got into it, it seems very natural and progressive. And there was a progression that happened over the years. But I'd love for you to perhaps share to women who are listening to this podcast, maybe young women who are in business or want to get into business, who want to perhaps have an interest to get involved in that. How could they get involved? How could this become a profession that more women get into rather than just all the guys?
It's interesting that you say that, Michael, because I don't think I even recognized that it was a male-dominated industry until later on. And then I'm like, oh, wow, where are the women? And with that being said, there are some remarkable women that are involved in search, that are involved in programming, and I've worked with them. And in fact, my colleague that I align with right now is a woman, and she is one of the top programmers that I've ever seen, and she's done some remarkable work. She puts mine, I don't want to say to shame, because certainly I've done some really terrific stuff, but she's actually consulted globally and on a much larger scale than I have. And we partnered together in 2009. We had worked together when we started the company in Connecticut, and then we went separate ways.
Yes.
And then we came back together. We saw each other at a show in New York, and she was really doing some really profound. She had been involved in search from the beginning, and then she got involved, completely immersed herself in programming, and women coders, oh my goodness. So we ended up aligning together and collaborating together, and today she's my number one person. So I look at women in this industry as being really strong women, women who have a vision. And as you had said earlier, it's a knowing. I don't think that you get into digital marketing by saying, oh, that looks kind of cool. Maybe I'll take a class on it. I think you get into it by having a passion and having a real passion for it and understanding your role in it. Because now as the internet has grown exponentially in directions that none of us knew about, social media, Twitter, Facebook, all of that stuff which came later, I think that you have to have a passion for it. And the women that I've met in this industry that have done well it's come from their heart and their soul that they want to be a part of it.
Yes.
And I remember a few years ago, I kind of kept the door shut when it came to social. I said, okay, I'm into organic search engine optimization. I'm Google certified for paid search. I'm going to stay in my comfort zone and I'm going to keep myself in that arena.
Yes.
And then I realized that people were going leaps and bounds above me. And I said, well, I've got to look at social a little bit. So a client would ask and I would kind of try to pass it off. But what ended up happening was I met another woman, and her involvement in the web was completely in social media.
Yes.
And she said, we sat down and we ended up talking, and she instantly became an amazing friend. Her name is Erin, and she lives in Brazil. And she said, you've got to get a voice out there, Debbie. You're doing some awesome work, but you're kind of in a shell.
Yes.
And let's look at Twitter, because Twitter is such a powerful medium. And I said, well, I have a Twitter account. I think I have about 5 people following me. She said, oh, stars, you're doing it wrong. So out of the goodness of her heart, she and I, through friendship, she taught me how to be on Twitter. And within a year, I went from 5 followers to, this was 2016. And right now, I think I've got over 5,000 people following me all over. And it's opened up doors that I didn't even know were available. And it really gave me an opportunity to share my authentic voice. And it has given me the opportunity to meet wonderful people like yourself through LinkedIn, through Twitter. So social was really important. So when it comes to women and women being involved in any aspect of the internet, is that it has to be your passion.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a great answer and a great explanation, because if it isn't, then obviously you're not going to make a success of it. You're not going to get in depth involved in it, and enjoy it. So, I mean, I guess with any business that you want to do on your own, you have to have that passion for it. And it's good, it's good to hear. And I think the US may be a bit different because, of course, all of the social media started in the USA anyway, all of this internet. Okay, you can argue whether it was in the UK or Al Gore. I mean, they never will agree on it, who invented the internet, whether it was Tim Berners-Lee or Al Gore, But so that's not the issue here. I think in the people that I meet, I go to I started going to a meetup group in the city closest to me, Birmingham, and it's called Silicon Canal. It's like, all the techies go there. And I don't know, it's not a American place, but they named it Silicon, obviously, in
Playing
connection.
off of San Fran, yes.
That's right, Silicon Valley, that's the one.
The Bay.
And there were all guys there. You know, in fact, there was one woman and she was hosting it and running it. But in the main, there were just all guys who were, you know, doing coding. But so I think the US is probably a better mix of women. But of course, you started so early on that it would have only been guys, I reckon, at that time. So yeah, well done, well done. So, okay, so you're doing this, you're creating strategies, you're creating websites for people. So far we've talked about all the great things, and we have to have a balance. So what have been some of the challenges, Debbie, in running your own business?
Oh, well, that's an easy question. It's easy to go down that slippery hole. I know. Yes. I remember sitting and talking with a fellow entrepreneur in a day where nothing was going right. Everything was going kerplunk, kerplooey, and the sky was falling. And there was a couple of things he said to me. And he said, you know, first of all, you have to have the salt to be able to do this, to be able to work on your own completely. And you really have to have the stamina to handle that. And I realized that I did have it. I did have it. And that I could handle the things that were, when everything broke, I was lucky enough to have some really, going back to the original days, to be able to call on some pretty esteemed people and say, okay, I don't know what happened, but the sky is falling and I don't understand it. And having so I think that mentoring and people that have helped along the way. I remember being into self-employment for 5 years, and I had some experiences where people had done outrageously wonderful things to help my journey and help me in my success. And I can think of them in my head immediately, who these people are. And they were people I had met at shows, search engine, SMX in New York City. And some of these folks who went out of their way to help, and they really didn't have any vested interest, and they weren't getting paid, but they did it. And then there were the charlatans, and it was very hard at that time to decipher, you know, some of the folks who had credibility and those who they looked credible, but they actually weren't. And I remember coming up against a situation where I was getting very burned by someone, and it was a hard lesson to learn.
Yeah.
But at the end of the 5 years of working for myself, I sat down and I thought of every single person that had been a part of that. And I wrote a very extensive thank you email. And I remember I was thanking the people that had helped me to grow and to learn, but I was also thanking the people who were adversaries because they taught me something and I learned from them. And so even when you face a challenge or when you're facing a situation where it is not an ethical situation, if you are able to walk away from that unscathed as possible, but also with some knowledge, then they've actually helped you. Yeah. So I thanked them as well.
It's amazing because I call every challenge a gift. And not when you're in the middle of it, it's not a gift. You don't know what the gift is yet. But often when it has passed, you can look back at it and go, actually, it was a gift. And, you know, those gifts are given to us to make us stronger, but also to be more discerning, recognize who the good guys and girls are and who are the bad girls and guys. And, understand that you don't do this on purpose, and you've got to learn and grow. And that is very commendable that you said, okay, these people that have been bad to me, I thank them as well. And very few of us are capable of doing that. But that's brilliant, because you let it go then. In that moment where you thank them and you show gratitude, you go, yeah, I've let you go. So.
And you take the experience of what you've learned and you apply it to yourself.
Yeah, that's a great examples. And thank you for sharing that. And then, so what is the vision for, it's Bravo, correct?
Oh, that's funny. Yes. The vision for Bravo. Bravo was created, Michael, when I started consulting, and I realized I can't do this alone. I'm not a programmer. I'm very technical, though. I understand code, and you have to be a true marketer where you're doing digital consulting. You have to be able to look at whatever scenario is put in front of you, whether it's a WordPress website or something that's custom coded on Ruby on Rails, or it's a PHP site. You have to understand the code so you know what you're working with. So I can understand it. I can't write it. I certainly won't even change a title tag. To this day, my developer, my dear programmer, she will say, please, will you learn this? Just get in there. And I'm like, oh, goodness, no. And I think that comes from the original days where if you made a mistake, poof, your website could be gone, forever. Yes. So I'm still reticent. And she said, but come on, Debbie, you can go in and change a title tag. And I said, yeah, I probably could, but I don't want to. So I've stayed where I've been. So Bravo, and it's funny because it started before the channel. We have a very big broadcasting channel in the States called Bravo. And I actually came up with that name in college. And it was fun. And what I envisioned for Bravo at the original time was that it was going to be a conglomerate of people.
Yes.
Because I have my area of expertise, and when I'm working with a client and we need some really big design work done, then I'm able to bring in a designer. So Bravo was created as a collaborative group, as a group of people who would be able to collaborate during certain times of a project. And then I put it under the Bravo umbrella. And it's funny because branding and self-branding, people know me as Deborah Norton or Debbie Norton. And I've had so many people say, so you work for Bravo, who owns it? You're like, well, wait a second. Nobody really owns it. It's kind of a collaboration I put together. And I've been recently thinking about how to take my own brand and how I'm going to be able to distinguish it from now the multitudes of people out there that are doing the same type of work that I'm doing.
Yes.
And that's been a real challenge, Michael. At the beginning, I was called on. I was flown out to places, and I was in because there were very few of us that really understood it. And now here we are in 2018. And if you look up digital marketing consultant on LinkedIn, you'll get 50 million results. And I'm one of them.
Yes.
And so this is a different juncture. This is a different time. And it's at this point, it has been, for me, I have had to step back a little bit right at this moment. It's interesting that our conversation has come in at this time because I used to be in such demand.
Yes.
I mean, the phone would just ring and I was turning clients away. I was turning, I remember firing a client that was at a very high rate per month. And I had to fire them because we weren't aligning in our thinking.
Yes.
And I said, and that was in 2011, to fire a client that was at a very high rate per month. It wasn't that tough.
No.
It was, it was a little skin off my chin, but it wasn't that hard. Today, it's a whole different ball game. So it's I'm at a juncture personally with myself, with my umbrella of Bravo, of redefining who am I online, what is my offering, who are the types of companies that I like to work with.
Yes.
And I know who that is. And if you're out there, your clients that are at least, in revenue between 10 million to 50 million a year in revenue is a good working base for me.
Yes.
I've worked with some of the Fortune 500 on my own and consulted for them.
Yes.
But they're not so easy to work with.
No.
Because they've got huge teams, and they've got a lot of red tape that you have to look at and be considerate of. And you may offer them some mission critical advice to fixing their site, and their internal team won't align with you, and they don't find a success. So I have really found myself working best with medium to large size privately owned companies. Have really been the best type of businesses that I really enjoy working with.
Yeah.
Because they have appreciation when you get them up to the top in search, and all of a sudden, they're ranking and they're converting and they're getting business. And those are the folks that I really like to work with. And at this point, I have to step back. I remember reading from a colleague somewhat, Jay Bear, who wrote, if the consultant that you're working with doesn't have a website, then they don't really know what they're doing. And I'm in that juncture. I'm like, oh my goodness. And if they've told you they've been too busy working with their clients, they're wrong. Well, I break that because I've been so busy working with clients that I haven't really had that juncture of having to self-brand. And now in 2018, as things have progressed so much, it's very difficult to be able for companies to distinguish who just took some fly-by-night classes in SEO and who's really a skilled practitioner.
Well, someone who started at the beginning of it all, and do you know what I mean? Somebody who you worked with the original people who wrote the book for it.
I know. It's unbelievable. Even to me, I have to pinch myself.
Yeah.
And please don't go on the Bravo site because it's not there and it's not ready. And that's the next juncture is going to be to redoing that and putting that together in a way that best represents me. And that's going to be by following all the without specifically saying rules, because there's always innuendos on every website, but I'm looking to stay and adhere as closely to the absolute best practices in search.
Yes.
So that things do progress for that, and really looking at self-branding. So at this juncture, people can find me on LinkedIn, like you did, under Deborah Norton, Chester, Connecticut. And they can also find me at Bravo Media 1 on Twitter. Brilliant. And I'm pretty active on Twitter, and I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So those would be the two spots right now. And that would be a place where I'd be happy to speak to anybody who's interested in search in any capacity, whether they're learning it or they want to get some more information. I've realized along the way that I've had so much help that now I'm really in a very solid place to be able to give back and help others.
And what you've raised there, and you probably didn't realize you were doing it, but you've raised a really excellent point that every business, doesn't matter how long they have been in business, and I've had to go through this several times, is you have to, as you've said, step back and re-examine what you're doing, where you're going, reinvent yourself in some way, reassess or redefine the direction, the goals, the kind of clients, and that is good practice. And thank you for being so honest and authentic about it, because it's real. You know, that does happen in every small business.
Yes, it does, Michael. And at that point, sometimes I think that people can trip and not be able to move forward. And I still have that drive. I still have that passion. And that's what you have to have. You have to have the drive and the passion to help propel you to the next level. And that's where I'm at right now.
Oh, fabulous. Debbie, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to hear your story and the magical mystery tour that you've taken, and how you literally started in the very original content, which was the newspaper and the advertising, which now is like, people are battling to keep newspapers alive in these days, and everybody's moving online, and some of them are being profitable at it now, I hear, being online with their newspapers. So that's interesting to hear.
It's good.
And wonderful. And I hope maybe one day, whether you ever travel to Europe or if I'm in the USA, we must meet up and have a coffee and a discussion. And I do look forward to the day when your website is live. So make sure you let me know, and I'll make sure I'll go back to the show notes and put the website in as well.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you so much for this opportunity to share my story. It's always interesting to hear yourself talk about how you got where you are, and you've given me that opportunity, and I cannot thank you enough. It's been so much fun, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Well, likewise, and I really appreciate your time. So we'll keep in touch online, and I'll speak to you soon. Take care.
Terrific. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Staying Alive UK. Share your story.